So good morning and welcome all to today's discussion, which is part of a series presented by the Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University in conjunction, the U.S. Embassy Rabat. This series is called Universal Design for Learning and Assessment for E-Learning in Higher Education. So just a few reminders for today. Every participant in today's webinar will receive a certificate after the webinar is completed. And in addition, for participants who attend 4 or more of the sessions in the series, we're pleased to offer a digital badge, which you can apply in many different contexts. And just a few other announcements. The event is recorded, and we will be sending the recording out after the session. And throughout the session today, we encourage you to use the chat feature to talk amongst yourselves and discuss the topic. And we will have a formal Q&A following the conversation today. So one of the most pressing issues for faculty in higher education is often the questions of academic integrity. And this has only been heightened as we move more and more towards hybrid and digital spaces. In our previous session, where we focused on universal design for learning, we discussed the idea that universal design for learning consists of goals, methods of instruction, the materials we use, and assessments. So today our conversation may touch on all 4 of these, but assessment will be top of mind. And to discuss this important topic of academic integrity, I'm pleased to be joined today by 2 colleagues from the Teachers College, Dr. Sam DeGangi, Associate Professor in the college, and Dr. Amy Marcos, Clinical Assistant Professor in the college. So welcome to the 2 of you. And Sam and Amy, would you mind providing just a short introduction to yourselves and your areas of focus and programs that you oversee? Dr. Marcos, would you mind going first?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. Currently, I work in Mary Lou Fulton Teachers College at Arizona State University. And some of my work there involves overseeing an online undergraduate program that serves.
وأنا أدرس لطلبة السلك الأول تقريبا 8
on educational studies. So students that are broadly interested in learning and teaching, but may or may not have decided that a classroom teaching experience is right for them. We offer about 36 courses a semester online, and that includes 36 lead instructors and upwards of 150 academic associates, all working together to meet the needs of our online students. Some of my work also involves working with our master's and our doctoral programs, which are also offered online.
Wonderful, thank you. And Sam.
Hi, thank you. It's good to be here. I look forward to interacting with you all. I'm Sam DeGangi. I'm a faculty member also with our Teachers College at ASU, and I coordinate a large online program in applied behavior analysis. We have upwards of 2,500 students currently, and I have an instructional team of over 100 instructors who are engaged in our online program. I also currently serve as program director for a USAID sponsored project in Malawi, focusing on open and distance learning and extending higher education throughout Malawi. So thank you, it's good to be here.
Thank you both. And it's worth noting that both Dr. DeGangi and Dr. Marcos oversee some of the largest programs, not only in our college, but also in the university. So we're very excited to have you talking with us about academic integrity, particularly in this online digital environment. So today's focus will be on a conversation amongst colleagues. And we want to open with a large question to begin, which is, how does your program address academic integrity with students and faculty? And Sam, would you mind kicking us off with your thoughts on this?
Oh, certainly. And academic integrity is, of course, receives a strong emphasis in any program, in particular in programs at a distance. And so we approach academic integrity from a range of viewpoints or perspectives. And most importantly, when students enter our program, we present ASU's academic integrity policy. We also combine that with explanation of the rationale behind academic integrity, not just as a set of rules, but how does it impact, and how does attention to academic integrity, to professional ethics, impact the value of the education experience of our students. This is something that we emphasize with our instructional team, our faculty, our instructors as well, and so that we are continuously providing our students with not only the rules, but examples of appropriate behavior and non-examples, so that they can become familiar with not just what is right, but how perhaps they could make mistakes.
Thank you. So one of the last points you made is kind of this idea of how we socialize or bring people into the ideas of what academic integrity is like, and that we need to do that not just for students, but also for faculty. Amy, could you maybe add to the conversation by talking a little bit around the faculty conversations that happen on academic integrity as you're preparing, say, for a new semester or a new year?
Yeah, sure. So one of the things that we do with our faculty in our undergraduate program, like Sam mentioned, when students enter his program, they learn about academic integrity. One of the ways that we support understandings related to academic integrity is we embed an academic integrity module into each one of our Ed Studies online courses. And that module is not only there for students, but it's there for faculty as well. And then through that module, instructors and students in every course establish a shared language related to academic integrity. And so, like Sam was saying, we include examples and non-examples in the module. Students end up taking a quiz to demonstrate their understanding of the expectations. And that's something that faculty then have as a shared experience to look back on when discussing concerns related to academic integrity, possibly in the future with students. But that shared module and that shared expectation for language also allows us as faculty to talk about concerns when they're raised in the program, right? So not only do faculty and students share a language around how do we talk about academic integrity and what does it mean, but then when faculty have concerns or questions, we can go back to the examples that we share and talk about them from that way, right? And so that really, that shared expertise and that shared set of examples turns out to be very beneficial. Something else that we do with faculty is we have kind of a shared set of documents for how to talk about academic integrity concerns when they arise in a course or in a program. And so we use those resources at the beginning of the course to kind of think ahead to maybe start faculty imagining what assignments may be tricky when it comes to academic integrity. What assignments might they be a little bit wary of at the get-go? And then we think about what tools and resources do we have for supporting students with those assignments ahead of time, and also reflecting on the work that students are submitting when it does come in related to issues of academic integrity. But it really starts with that hub of a shared understanding about how are we defining this, how are we talking about it, and what examples and non-examples do we have.
Wonderful, thank you so much both. And just a quick reminder to our participants, Please feel free to discuss the topics actively in the chat. Our support team on this webinar will be helping us work through those chats and bringing them up as needed. We'll also have a formal Q&A at the end of the session. And in addition, just one more reminder as we get started on our journey. If you're needing Arabic translation, please select the Spanish channel, and that will allow you to receive our provided Arabic translation. So thank you. So in what you're both sharing, academic integrity is part of the environment that gets created at all levels of the organization. So it's not just conceptual, it's not just words in a syllabus, but it's actually part of and built into the whole experience. Do you find that there are, maybe starting with students, for whom this language, for whom this concept is new? And what has been your experience of maybe working through some examples or questions about academic integrity with students? Sam, would you mind starting us off with that question?
Sure, and actually that's a very good question, because a very relevant question, because we do find that that regardless of age of our students, and in our programs, we have students who span the range of age through young through adult, and the concept of academic integrity varies quite a bit. There are those who associate academic integrity with traditional views of or cautions of plagiarism, but we find that it's very important to extend beyond what might be seen as traditional academic integrity violations to give real life examples. One that's very timely today is behavior in social media. We give examples and we talk with our students and our faculty on how to demonstrate appropriate behavior when participating in discussion groups, in Facebook focused areas, and when using digital media that may feel as if it is private, but in reality is of course not. And so this is an area that we found of value and necessary to emphasize, to give real life current examples of how to and what needs to be focused on regarding academic integrity and professional ethics.
And so one of the things that I think you're illuminating for us and for the panelists is that academic integrity is not, the concept is not the same as the concept of quote unquote cheating, right? Academic integrity is beyond just copying someone else's work.
Exactly, and also along those lines, intent. We find that that our students oftentimes will think of academic integrity as very much related to intent. Did I purposefully cheat, or did I do something purposefully that violates the policy or the requirements of the expectation? And so we take time to give examples that there can be violations of academic integrity regardless of intent or whether you meant to do it. And we find that is very important.
That's very interesting, and I'm wondering, Amy, if you could elaborate on that. It seems like this is also connecting to ideas of as was said in our first question, values of education, professionalism, self-representation. There seems to be a lot going on there, and I'm wondering if you could help us unpack that a bit.
Sure. So I think one of the examples that I'd like to talk about that comes up sometimes in our undergraduate coursework is we will have students who, for one reason or another, end up not passing a course and need to take the course again in the future. And part of the academic integrity expectations would be that students submit original work every time they're taking a course. And so in these instances, we reach out to students right away and say, we understand you're taking the course again. Let's have a conversation around what does it mean to submit original work for a course that you've already taken once before, right? Does it mean that you have to do everything scrap from zero again, right? Or does it mean that you can look at the work you did in the past, think about what you could do to make it better, communicate with your instructors about how you're making changes to your assignment? So we try to approach it from understanding the expectations of what it means to be authentic and contributing your best original work, but how sometimes our original work stems from something we've done in the past, right? So these are students that have engaged in a course before. They might have the same exact paper that they've written, for the class previously. And so we talk with them about what does it mean then to make this better and to make this now original work. So like Sam said, we talk with students about their experiences and the intentionality of academic integrity and how to fulfill those intentions. And then when students make mistakes and they don't intend to make a mistake, but they do, then we have to coach and work with them around what happened, why did it happen, how can we avoid it in the future. And Sam mentioned a few things like social media. In a lot of our online courses, we use YellowDig as a discussion platform, which very much mimics like a Facebook setup, right? And so we talk with students about how to be respectful, how to speak their truth, but also allow for others to share their truths as well. And so that's another place that we promote this idea of academic integrity. And also when our students go out for internships, we talk about what does it mean to present yourself in the field, to work with community members. And then also, like Sam mentioned, his student population is quite varied. We also in educational studies in our undergraduate program have both what you might consider a traditional undergraduate college student, somebody who's fresh out of high school, now starting a college career. But we also have a number of students in our program that are coming back to university work after a period of time away, or maybe deciding their kids are now in school and they want to come back and get a degree, or they're not happy in their career, so they're making a change. And all of these learners come to the context of our program with different ideas as to what it means to communicate with one another via text, via Slack, via email. And so one of the things that we talk with our students about, and also talk with our instructors, is just how do you communicate, right? How do you present yourself between students and across students and instructors, and how do you show your best side there as well?
That's so interesting. And I think it's interesting because I think many of us experience academic integrity as a set of very hard and fast rules, right? That there are some very specific rules and guidelines. For example, I think about in my own graduate program, right, when you cite an author, right, you cite and you use this format, and there's kind of this sense of just follow the rules and you'll be fine. And I think there's part of that in what you're saying, but what you're also saying is that academic integrity is actually a lived value that is multifaceted, right? It has many elements, and one can cite everything and do everything right in that regard, but still wrestle with academic integrity issues. And I'm wondering if you could deepen us into that aspect of it in terms of rules versus attitudes versus, maybe not versus, but rules, attitudes, etc., with some more examples. And Amy, if you wouldn't mind sharing your thoughts on that.
Stuart, I think one of the things that you're getting at is that sometimes when we have rules in place, students might follow the rules but not understand why the rules are there. And then when there's, okay, so let me bring up another example. In looking at students' papers, sometimes we can see that a student has followed all the rules for citing information about outside sources. But what's lacking from the paper is anything original that the student is bringing to the table, right? So in terms of like, are they following the rules of plagiarism? Sure, they haven't, they've cited everything appropriately. But what's lacking is their thinking and their understanding about why are they citing these other authors? Why are they bringing in these other ideas, right? What is their contribution to this piece as a learner? And so in those instances, it's not a plagiarism concern, right? But we're talking with students about, I see you're really nervous about citing all of these works and you've done that appropriately, but what's missing is your voice, right? So that's an instance where a student might be following the rules for submitting work that meets the expectations for plagiarism, but they're nervous about making their own stamp, about bringing in their own ideas, right? And so when we have deliverables from students, unless it's just they tell me what somebody else is saying, which is very rare, you might have a comprehension check at some point in your course, but we want to move students up the levels of cognition, right? We want them to be analyzing, applying, synthesizing information. And so when I see instances like that, we talk about what is the intent of this assignment, right? And how do we get your voice in there? And I think that when we're talking about academic integrity, like Sam was saying earlier, it's not to put rules on a situation, right? It's more to embody the values of what it means to be a learner in this community, right? And what is your responsibility as a learner to not only consume information, but produce original thought for others to take away and learn from. And I think that that's one of the things that when you understand the value of academic integrity, you create space for students to see that it's not about restricting me. It's actually about honoring my place as a learner and my contribution to this learning environment.
Please, Sam.
Well, yeah, and actually extending something that Amy mentioned on what we have come to refer to as recycling one's work. Amy described some situations in which students may resubmit the same work that they had created in other courses. And we will talk about this a bit later in the program, that we place emphasis on product in our courses, and so we do intentionally repeat assignments throughout the program, giving students multiple opportunities to both show their competence with the assignment and to receive feedback from a range of instructors. And so the notion of original work is something that we continuously need to emphasize, because we find that it is not the case of plagiarism in its traditional sense. When it was my work, I wrote it, why can I not submit it again? It's mine. It is not someone else's. I'm not stealing. And we find that that providing the rationale as to why we have these policies of not resubmitting or not recycling, because it is in the student's best interest to gain multiple, to have multiple attempts, multiple opportunities to generate their work, even though, yes, technically they may own those words, those products, and that is something that is not easily conveyed. I would say that of the realm of academic integrity concerns, that concept is one that we continuously emphasize. But again, as Amy was pointing out, conveying why, not just showing the policy, is very important.
So I think one of the things that is really alive for me in this, and I think will carry us into sort of our next theme, which is the development of assessments, is that we're talking about, first and foremost, we're talking about something bigger than the topic of cheating, whether it be in a face-to-face mode or in the online mode. What we're talking about in some ways, I think, is a set of academic, we could call them institutional values, cultural values shared, right, by a community of individuals engaging in higher education. And that those values are set, we could say at a minimal or foundational level by an institution, right? The academic integrity policy of the university or college. And then those policies are really brought to life, right, in a structured and progressive way by the students' engagement in their various courses and throughout the duration of their program. So that in theory, a person starting their first year of college or university would look very different from their perspective of academic integrity, their ability to implement its principles as they move towards graduation. So it is actually not just a single kind of body of rules that are followed, but rather habits of being, ways of thinking, ways of engaging, right, that grow in the same way that a student's academic content knowledge grows over time. Just because I don't want to trap us in a definition that we don't necessarily agree with, does that seem like a good jumping off point for us as we move into a discussion of the assessment element of this? Wonderful. So assessment obviously is often the space where the world, we could say the world of academic integrity, right, and reality collide. In an American colloquialism, we would say it's where the rubber meets the road, right? So when we think about assessments, if we think about it simplistically as cheating, right? You cheated on that test. You were looking at other people's papers or you got the answers. So assessment is often that site where people feel the most friction when it comes to academic integrity. I think it's important to note, based on our conversation, that it's clearly not the only place, right? But it's a critical place. And historically, it seems that in many cases, the answer to academic integrity and assessments has been to try and shift towards the most easy to administer, in some sense, form of assessment. And that might be multiple choice quizzes, right? Something that is in some sense so narrowly defined, right? You're right or wrong, right? But as I think we learned in the Universal Design for Learning intro webinar that we previously had, and I think as we're going to learn more today, actually the more well thought through and the richer the assessment, the more likely it is actually to support academic integrity. So what I'd love to jump into is, Sam, how do you see yourself as a professor and your program and your faculty connecting assessment and academic integrity together, just at the highest possible level?
No, certainly, and actually, that this is a good jumping off point to assessment, because we see them very much intertwined by necessity, and just as sort of described, that we attempt to place emphasis with our students and with our faculty on the rationale, on why We have an academic integrity policy on why professional ethics receive the level of attention that we place on them. With assessment, we take the same perspective, and we intentionally build in a focus on why for our students. And as example, we find that as we include and use a continuum of assessment approaches, from forced choice, multiple choice, to the real emphasis being placed on formative assessment, we, throughout our courses, we teach our students about assessment, so that they are not only being assessed, they are learning how to assess. And so they are self-assessing their work using the same rubrics and structure that we are using as instructors. And so we found that it is of great value to not just be evaluating and providing feedback, but from the beginning, to be teaching our students about assessment. So they are becoming experienced, they're gaining expertise in approaches to assessment, as well as having their work assessed. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. Such a fascinating idea of this, continuing to introduce the why, right? This real intentionality around teaching, right? And Amy, I'm wondering if you can, share some specific examples of how this looks in your teaching and in how you support the program that you oversee.
I'm so glad that Sam launched this conversation off with bringing learners into the learning experience, not just from the learner position, but also understanding the tools that we use as educators to create a learning environment. And I think the better students understand the pedagogical moves that instructors are making when they design a course, right? And the tools we have in place to support both the learning and the demonstration of learning, the more embodied learners are to then assess their own learning experiences, as well as a teacher assessing their learning. And I think that really gets to one of those ideas or values about academic integrity, right? Is that also, as a learner, you need to demonstrate that you understand how you're showing what you're learning, and that you can use the tools like the rubrics or the expectations to make sure you're submitting work that is of high quality, that honors what you're trying to put forth, right? And that's in line with the expectations for the course. And not just so that you can do well in a course, right? But that you can then have conversations with your instructors if opportunities arise about, well, I'm not really sure why I was graded in this way, or I'd like to talk with you about this piece of my video where I said X, Y, and Z, and I thought that that was in line with the rubric expectation. I think the more empowered students are to use those tools when they're both creating and submitting deliverables in a course, the better they understand how they're placing their authentic self in the learning experience, right? Which is what we want students to do. We don't want them to take an idea from someone else and just say, here's my thinking, right? We do really want it to be the students' understandings and applications of the concept. I think one of the specific ways that I can talk about this intentionality across and helping students understand why we're doing it the way that we are. And one of our lower division courses, 200 level class. So this is early on in the undergraduate career. We place a pretty heavy emphasis on writing across one of our courses. But we also understand that students at a 200 level might need support with learning how to write, college level expectations and writing. Now, this course is not a writing course, right? Yet we have this assessment that requires students to write pretty regularly, right? And what we found early on was that this repeated expectation for writing was really giving our students a challenge because we weren't teaching them how to write. We were expecting that they came to the class able to write, were proficient at doing the things we wanted them to do so that they could use the tool of writing to demonstrate comprehension of course concepts. Mm-hmm. And when students would turn in papers that were not meeting expectations, as an instructional team, we were left wondering, well, is it that they don't understand the course concepts, or is it they're really struggling with writing, right? They're not doing well in the paper either way, but we were unable to get to the root of the problem. And that is troubling when you're trying to assess, did your students understand the course concept, right? Mm-hmm. So we had to flip how we were presenting these writing assignments and also reimagine how to grow students as writers in a course that wasn't about teaching writing. So we had to look at the assessment tool that we had chosen and ask ourselves as an instructional team, what is this tool also unintentionally assessing? What are aspects of this tool that are getting in the way of us using this tool for its intended purpose? So we had to totally present the series of writing across our course in a different way, right? We needed to talk with students about how a paper was a tool that we were using. The goal of this was to be able to assess X, Y, and Z. And in order to support you in developing as a writer, we're going to increase the writing expectations as we move through the course and support you as we go, right? Mm-hmm. And so we found that with some slight changes, we were able to, instead of day one saying, this is the expectation we have for papers, we took that expectation, that was now the last day of the course, and we backwards designed. How can we grow and support their abilities as writers so that we can access the true content we're trying to assess through this tool? And talking with students that way and opening up conversations for, is there another, like early on in the writing process, maybe set up a video chat, come and talk with us on the phone. Share your ideas about your paper with us if you're struggling with writing so that we can assess that you've got the concepts of the course. Now let us help you with your writing. But because we never made clear to students, you know, what was the real goal? It wasn't to write an amazing paper, right? It was that we need this paper to assess, are you understanding the course concept? But until we made that clear to students, they didn't come to us and say, I really struggle with writing. I think I understand the concepts of the course, but I just, you know, it's been a really long time since I've been in college and we never used APA, we all used MLA, and I haven't written a full paper since, you know, for 4 years, I'm really struggling here. Mm-hmm. Students didn't bring those concerns to us until we were really honest with them about what was the intention of this assessment.
Mm. And I think it's wonderful because I think that's also a real demonstration around this sort of fundamental principle of universal design for learning that we discussed in the previous webinar, right? Which is that we aren't in a sense turning a blind eye to the real conditions of the students going through our classes, right? We are actually thinking very intentionally about what we're trying to achieve and building the assessment to not only usher them along in terms of the academic concepts of the class, but their total growth, right? As a student, as a potential scholar, as a potential professional. And that's really sort of, I think would be exciting for students to know if they could look under the car hood, as it were, and see, oh, like the faculty in my program are thinking about how do they shepherd me, right, through this process, that the assessments are not intended to trip me up or to be ways to punish me, right, for my lack of skill, but rather an opportunity for us to grow together. It's interesting, and I'm glad that you mentioned writing as a main way. And I know that as we look at a program like Applied Behavioral Analysis, which is, Sam, your program that has over 2,000 students and often over 500 people in a class. Maybe you could just talk a bit for our audience, just what is it like to build assessments for a program in classes of that size and how do you do it?
No, certainly. And, you know, well, actually, I'm going to reference something that Amy just mentioned. You know, we need we need to take care to ensure that that the format of our assessment of our assignments, and then therefore the assessments, that the technologies that we are using are not detracting from the intent of the assignment, of the application, and of the way that we assess and that we evaluate and interpret the students' work. So to your question, sir, you know, we strive to provide a wide range of both opportunities for our students to practice and to demonstrate their competence, and as well on a wide range of assessment approaches, because we recognize that that many of our students will graduate from our program, and then perhaps they will seek a credential, or they will be sitting for an exam that will be very formal and very specific in its format. And so we want to provide our students with the opportunity to, as I mentioned earlier, to both participate in a range of assessment approaches, and then to also gain confidence as well as competence with those assessment approaches. So as an example, when for large format or extreme large format courses, we break the courses down in a way that students are working in smaller groups, that they are engaging in team activities, as well as individual activities, and so that we are able to scale both in terms of the size of the course, but then also with respect to the time that the instructor will need to invest in assessing the students' work and providing guidance and feedback. And so some of the formats that we use a format of question and response that would be very similar to a face-to-face course, where we present a question or a prompt, and the student, in the case of one of our formats of assessment, the student records their response, a 1 to 2 minute response to a question that they are presented. They respond to it orally, verbally, and so it's moving them away from only using written responses or only using multiple choice responses. This also provides our faculty with the opportunity to be able to efficiently view the student's response and to provide them with feedback. And so a very important component of the design of the assessment approaches is certainly to take into consideration the investment of time of the instructor or of the instructional team, because we need to ensure that the instructors are able to efficiently review the student's work, accurately review the student's work, and to provide substantive feedback. I'm not sure if I answered your question. I may have gone in a different direction there.
No, I think that's great. And I think it really speaks to an earlier comment, in some sense, just connecting a dot of, with large courses, with large number of faculty, right? This also speaks to this element of faculty training, right? Faculty dialogue, right? Because if you're having 100 instructors, right? For example, with many academic associates, equivalent of, maybe we could call them teaching assistants, but they're actually professionals, so they're not graduate students, right? So you have this, and then you have these novel forms of assessment, right? That you really have to go through the process of training faculty to be able to use these assessments, and also to provide meaningful feedback on this type of assessment. And maybe you could speak a bit to that as well.
No, and certainly, and we find that it is essential that our instructional team, our faculty members, have ongoing communication throughout their course. This is how we ensure consistency across the courses. As example, right now we have a course going on in actually professional ethics, one of the core courses in our program, and we have 1,600 students in that course. And so with our instructional team, roughly 70 co-instructors, we refer to them, they serve in the role not as teaching assistant, they are credentialed. They have the credential that many of our students are seeking, and we provide them with ongoing interaction between the lead instructor, the professor, and among the members of the instructional team on approaches to assessing students' work, to providing feedback. We use we make continuous use of an online environment in which the instructional team communicates. We find that is essential. Otherwise, we have a large number of faculty who are operating independently or on their own, and they are not learning from and using the experience of the other members of the instructional team.
Mm-hmm. And maybe adding to what Sam has shared, Amy, just around those aspects of not just the assessment itself, but also the quality of feedback on the assessment. And maybe connecting that to another opportunity to sort of reinforce academic integrity in some sense.
So I think it was you, Stuart, that gave the analogy of opening up the hood of the car and seeing what's inside, right? And we talked using that analogy about the importance of ensuring that students understand why we're asking them to do the things we are throughout a course. I think it's also essential to have instructional team members communicating with students about how and why they are providing them feedback, right? And being very intentional. In an online course, you have a variety of tools that you can use to give feedback to students. And I encourage my instructors and my instructional teams to be intentional about which tools they're going to use, why, how often, for what purposes, so that when students access feedback from an instructor, they know what they're going to be receiving, they know what it means, why the instructor's using that, and how they're supposed to use that feedback moving forward. And like Sam was mentioning, we talk about those things in our instructional team meetings, right? What are some tools that we have available? Sam mentioned sometimes students record videos. We find that using video feedback with our students is very effective at establishing relationships with students early on. So one of the things that we do in our courses is within the first 2 lessons of a course, we try to provide video feedback to students and establish a video communication to say, hey, welcome to the course. This is who I am. I'm excited to be supporting your learning in this class. Yes. And then students will use that same style of video communication with us throughout, right? And so that opens the door that we're not just somebody behind a screen sending emails or making comments on a paper or on a video. We're here, we're reading your work, we're engaged and supporting you throughout this experience. And we've also found that, again, lessons learned with feedback for students. One of kind of the things that we've decided to do in most of our courses now is early on in a class, we actually create an assignment and award students points, right, towards their final grade for showing us they know how to access our feedback. Because we realized too late in the game that we would be halfway through a course and the student would say, oh, I didn't know where to find that feedback. Oh, you've been leaving me feedback for 5 weeks? I haven't been reading it. And we're like, oh no, that's not the point. So we found that in our course design, just like we talked about the plagiarism or the academic integrity module, one of the things we embed early on in our courses is please show us you can find our feedback. Right? Show us that you know where to access this information. In other courses, we've also asked students what we kind of call like a cover letter text when they're submitting an assignment, to add in an assignment comment to say, hey, you know, Dr. Amy, I know on my last video you mentioned, and so in this video, I've da 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 da, right? And that is part of their overall grade for an assignment. Sam talked about how some of our assignments intentionally grow and build, right? And so if we have assignments like that in the course, part of the expectation for the assignment is for you to talk about what happened the last time you submitted this series of work, you know, and how are you improving on that? What are you doing differently this time around? And so we're engaging with students about the expectations and the rubric and the feedback each time they move forward in the course.
And actually, if I may, and as Amy, you know, is mentioning, this ties back to what we talked about at the beginning, to academic integrity. And through this iterative, this continuous process, we are programming for and ensuring academic integrity, because we are not merely evaluating students' work at one isolated point in time, but they are building upon their initial work. They're incorporating the feedback that they are receiving, and so it reduces, if not eliminates, the opportunity or the chance of you know, of recycling work or of using someone else's work, and so it becomes part of the process. One other point that Amy makes that I want to support as well: the need to have students demonstrate their ability to use the tools, to use the resources, whether it be parts of the learning management system, to locate where the feedback is being provided. It's essential. And it sounds like such a common sense thing for us to be saying, but I want to highlight what Amy mentioned, that it is essential that we intentionally check to make sure that students are they seeing the announcements? Do they know where to find the feedback that we're providing? Building that in as a formal part of the course, we found to be essential. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's so interesting, and I think it's so important for myself and for our audience to keep coming back to what I think is this definition of academic integrity that is about the growth of the student over time, right? And that the growth of the student as an entity that is engaging in scholarly work, even as a first-year student in an undergraduate program, that they're entering a world of scholarship and they're participating in it. And learning what that means, to the idea that as faculty are nurturing growth over time. So academic integrity is part of taking, accepting, and evolving from feedback from faculty. But on the, not on the other side, as it were, but faculty are also, in a sense, committing to engage, right, in that process as well, to give meaningful and useful feedback, to guide students in understanding and applying these ideas of academic integrity, which go beyond what we could call the simple rules of things like plagiarism or cheating, but are about growing as an individual, as a scholar, as part of an academic community. And I think that's so critical, because otherwise both assessment and academic integrity become very flat, one-dimensional concepts, right? They're, what do you know? And did you not use other tools to know things that you didn't? Like, did you write on your hand? I think about the most simple forms of cheating, right? Did you have a slip of paper that you pulled out, right? If we engage this concept really richly, then it actually informs great teaching, great learning, and actually provides the student with an opportunity to mature. It actually helps the student mature as an individual, as a member of a community, right, as a future professional or scholar, whatever their trajectory may be. We have a question in here, and I think it's apropos to go to it as a question, which is, so many times e-learning classes, online digital classes, have various different forms of assessment, right? So as you were talking about recording video, for example. And I'm wondering, what feedback have you received from students? Maybe this is the first time they've ever done something in a digital or e-learning format. And so what has been the feedback from students about the ways and methods of assessment? And also, what have been some of the faculty's feedback or even concerns around the nature of assessment? And I'm wondering, Sam, if you could speak to that, and then Amy.
Sure. And as example, the approach that I mentioned earlier, we refer to it as a video comprehension check. This is the quick question video response format that we've used. Initially, when we introduced this, it's been about a year ago now, the reactions were quite mixed. Some immediately, our students, they enjoyed having the opportunity to both provide and to provide their response and receive feedback in a different format than they are used to, perhaps during their their primary and secondary school careers, or their undergraduate, we're in a graduate program. They were appreciative of that. We had others, we have a subset of students who were very troubled by that format because they wanted to have the opportunity to script their response, to research their response in advance, and then to read it. And so working through differences in format of assessment, very important. And we've then found that that providing students with some practice, non-graded, not scored opportunities to use this format prior to what they viewed as their official submissions was very important, so that they could become acquainted with and familiar with that format, and to move beyond the desire to always have something that is very polished before they present it to the instructor, to the instructional team. And so that, and we refined that based on feedback from our students. One of the other areas, the approaches to assignment and to assessment, we make use of team discussions, synchronous live team discussions. Small groups of students meet. We use Zoom as our synchronous platform. They hold a team discussion meeting, and together they respond to prompts and questions that are presented for that exercise, for that lesson. It's recorded, but the component that is directly assessed is a summary that the team together writes of their meeting, of their discussion meeting. And we find that student response to this format as well is initially oftentimes mixed, because there are students who are apprehensive of a group project, just as someone would be in if there is such a thing as traditional face-to-face environment. Am I being assessed individually, or is my grade being impacted by others in the group? And so there, this is a long way of saying that we have found that it is very important to emphasize, as I mentioned earlier, to emphasize the why and the how of the assessment. Where does this type of assessment fit in the overall evaluation of the individual's performance? Yeah. addresses your question, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, thank you. And so Amy, I wonder if you might talk a little bit about your students and then talk a bit about the faculty experience of assessment.
Sure. I think one of the important things to echo about what Sam is saying is he's talking about the feedback he received from students, but what he didn't explicitly say is that he sought feedback from students, right? So this question assumes that we're asking students to share with us what they think about the assessments we're using in the class. And I don't think that that's always the case, right? So, but if we see students as scholars, if we see them as contributing, not just consuming the information that we're sharing with them, then it would make sense that both with faculty and with students, we seek their feedback on course assignments, on course deliverables, on the pedagogical practices we're using in a class. And then we use the feedback to make changes, right? So students will quickly stop sharing their input with you if they don't see how the input is being used. And so it's not just about asking students for feedback, but it's then letting students and faculty know, thank you, this feedback is going to help us do X, Y, and Z. Or now that you've shared this with us, we are going to make the following changes. And I think a lot of, like at our university, we have a standardized course evaluation that we ask students to complete, which is very generic, and it doesn't give us the fine-grained information we want about making course level changes. And so we have to think about when and where are we seeking input from students about the assignments that are in the class. And the same thing comes to faculty, like how do we have opportunities and when and where do we provide opportunities to seek faculty input? But when you do create those spaces, whether it's through a survey or whether it's through an additional like question on an assignment, right, that asks students to offer feedback on making changes to this, or what other ways might they demonstrate this understanding that we haven't thought of ourselves. We need to make clear to students, reiterate the intentionality of the assessment, right? So this was intended to tell us how well it worked. What suggestions or feedback? Because if we don't make clear that we're looking to stick with the intent, but maybe modify the tool, then we might get things like, well, I really don't like doing videos. Okay, we get that videos are hard for you, or I really don't like having to, I really prefer to write in my answers. I don't like speaking. Okay, but the intent was to be able to give a quick, off the cuff, not refined snapshot of your thinking so far in the course, right? That we would come back to. So what is another quick way that we could do that? Maybe it's a handwritten note that then they have to submit, or maybe it's a Post-it or something, right? How else can they share it? We're not looking for a refined presentation at this point. We're looking for your initial quick understanding that we can then use to grow from, right? So it could be a tweet or something, right? Like, okay, you have 140 characters. Like you don't get a 2-minute video, but you get 140 characters. Tell us what you think, right? So they might give us feedback, but we have to stick to the intent of why are we doing an assignment? Otherwise, the feedback might take us in different directions. And it's the same with your instructional teams. Once your instructional teams are very clear on the intentionality of an assessment, they can look at their students' work and say, if we were intending to do this, this is not what we got. Right? Look at in these videos, we're not hearing this, we're not hearing that. And so, and when a number of students don't meet the expectations or the intentionality of an assessment, it's not the students that are at fault. Right? Then that's a course issue. That's an instructor issue. We haven't prepared them accurately for what we were hoping they would be able to do with this deliverable. And so instructional team members are essential in being able to circle back to the intentionality of an assignment, of an assessment. And Sam and I use those words interchangeably, right? Because any assignment is a form of assessment. It might be a formative assessment, right? Not a summative assessment. But so you have to think of the intentionality and then seek feedback from there.
So much great information, and we're getting so much good discussion and questions in our Q&A and chat. So I'd like to turn to sort of talking about some of the main themes that are coming out there. But what I first like to do is to summarize what at least I think I've learned today, and make sure, and let me do a check for understanding with our two presenters, right? Which is, so I think first and foremost that we see academic integrity as an integral part of the overall experience, and that academic integrity is defined at different levels. There's the academic integrity rules of the college or university, we might say institutional rules, right? And then there are the specific experiences and implementations of those in programs, in classes. And I think a theme that you've brought out is that at the program and class level, faculty training, discussion, and engagement on what academic integrity means is essential, and an ongoing dialogue at the faculty level. When we think about academic integrity, we're trying to move beyond single definitions, perhaps, or single focuses. Like, we're not just focusing on plagiarism or cheating, but we're focusing on the development of an academic culture or an academic identity for the student, one in which they are sharing their own work, contributing in positive ways to their own and others' learning, but doing that within this context of authenticity and rigor, right? Which is part of that academic integrity question. And that academic integrity is integral to the entire class experience, not just assessment, but that there are some things that we can do in assessment that move them towards this more multi-dimensional, multi-component way of thinking about academic integrity. So using assessment as actually an evolutionary tool, as a way to help students move forward in their learning, rather than simply seeing them as gates, right, that students pass through and it's an all or nothing. It's every assessment, whether it be formative, right, an interim assessment, or even a final assessment, has an opportunity, right, for the student to grow and learn, to receive feedback, to incorporate that feedback. And all of that is part of academic integrity as we're defining it. So if we start from that, definition and that thought process, we have a lot of questions or some themes emerging in our questions around this idea. First and foremost, let's talk very briefly around let's call them worst case scenario extreme examples, right? So how have you found yourself needing to handle examples when faculty or students don't understand it, or actively, in a sense, working in a way that doesn't demonstrate academic integrity? And I'm wondering, Sam, if you could speak to that question.
Oh, sure. And and of course we've seen a wide range of those types of scenarios that you are describing. We have thousands of examples, or thousands of data points from our students. We find that from an academic performance view, as well as an academic integrity view, referring the student's attention back to, on an academic performance side, the rubric. From an academic integrity side, the institutional policy and the intent of those policies, to always refer back to those standards as the point of discussion and point of conversation, so that when we observe an academic integrity concern somewhere along the continuum, that it's not being approached and presented to the student as as my opinion, or as the instructor or the co-instructor's opinion, subjective opinion, but we refer back to the standard or to the rubric or to the examples and non-examples as a starting point for that conversation. We found that to be quite effective in helping to shape the conversation. Otherwise it becomes can quickly become a well, that's your opinion and that's not my opinion, or that's your interpretation, that was not my intent. And so focusing on that function, on where are we coming from with the question, with calling out a concern, keeping it as objective as possible as a point of discussion is very important. Now, can things elevate quickly beyond control?
Sure.
Certainly. And so we try to ground the comparisons in the discussion in something that's very objective and work from there.
Thank you. We're also getting questions that really have to do with student background and experience. And as I think about those themes, Amy, I really come back to what you were saying around this idea of writing assessments, right? And helping students understand how to write and how to do the assessment. And I'm wondering if you could maybe speak to the kind of, we could call it the culture, right? Or the mindset of the faculty when it comes to not just teaching the content, but also helping the student become familiar with the tools, with the environment, et cetera.
Yes, so I think that I can answer this question and speak to a little bit of parallel with this with the worst case scenario, because I think we can do both. When we have a student that's struggling or that has maybe had an academic integrity concern, or we're aware of something that's happening, we see that as instructors as a teachable moment. So our first move when we have a concern, like Sam talked about, is to go back to the student with the policy for academic integrity or with the expectations from the rubric and ask the student to have a conversation with us about what's going on here, right? So we always see this as an opportunity to help them understand how to do better in the future. And so that takes coaching and also building that attitude with instructors, because sometimes instructors want to say, no, this student's being dishonest, they submitted this work, they need to get a 0 and done, right? And that could be, like, students could have malintent, right? They might be intentionally submitting work that they know is not their own, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so again, it comes back to this value of what do we do when students are in that space? And so we have decided as educational studies faculty that when we are engaging with a student in a course, because we do not know what's happened with that student in other courses, what's happened with that student in other university experiences, whether at our university or elsewhere, that we have to treat our first instance with a student as this is possibly the first time this has ever happened for this student. And we treat it as a teachable experience. Now, sometimes students will tell you, oh yeah, I copied that paper. I ran out of time and I just found one on the internet and I submitted it. Okay, so it sounds like you had intent, you understood that that was wrong. These are the consequences that are gonna take place, right? But other times students will say, I didn't know that I wasn't allowed to do that, or I didn't realize that I was doing this in the wrong way. But either way, whatever students tell you, right? The first student said, I ran out of time. Okay, so it sounds like this is a time management concern that we need to help you learn about, right? How are you balancing your time? What do you have on your plate? What was different for this lesson than any lesson previously in our course where you were able to submit your own original work, right? But if we don't have those conversations, the student doesn't learn, right? They don't learn how to improve in the future. Now, I'm sure that a lot of our listeners, we have 153, are saying, Amy, that's a real, we might say a Pollyanna perspective, right? Oh, every student is just learning the first time around. So on the back end of our program, Stuart, we engage with students, we support them, we see it as a teachable moment, but then we document information. We have what we call an academic integrity officer in our college. And so while I might not know what's going on with the student, once I have a concern and I work with that student, I can submit a form to my academic integrity officer and let her know. I teach this course, I have this student, this is what happened. Now, on her side of things, as the academic integrity officer for the college, she can look at that data and she can go, oh, that's interesting. That student that you're having a concern with, that student had the same type of a concern in a course previously. And then at the college level, right, our academic integrity officer can step in and say, Amy, I know that the student told you X, Y, and Z, but I'm going to follow up because this is not the student's first concern, right? And so we have multiple systems in place to both help students from because my goal as an instructor is to help, to teach, to improve, to move you forward, like you talked about, Stuart, right? To have the better self of you moving forward. But at the college level, if my academic integrity officer sees a different story, then she will step in with more severe consequences, right? But that's not my role as the teacher of the course. So that's one of the ways that we do both, help them learn, but also have a check for maybe they're playing us and we need to step in with a firmer hand. Does that make sense?
Well, and actually, if I may extend what Amy is mentioning, this is also something, this approach that Amy is describing is, I don't want to downplay the importance and the time investment in working through this with our instructional team as well, and with our faculty. And we find that this is essential because, as Amy mentioned, we are presenting our perspectives and the perspective that we establish for our programs, but we also have to recognize that we have an instructional team of individuals, professionals, academically qualified instructors, but also variations in perspectives toward plagiarism, toward academic integrity violations. This is an ongoing learning experience, professional development experience for our instructional team. And we find that is as important as helping our students to learn from from these situations. Our instructional team learns as well. Sorry, back to you.
Yeah, no, I think that's so essential. And some of the questions I think that can arise, particularly in these webinars as we look at online learning, right, is at least at the level of Arizona State University, right, we have chosen as an institution to invest in layers of policy, of technology, of tools, so that things like, for example, academic integrity and online tests, right? We have online proctoring, right? We have systems in place, right? We have models in place so that each faculty member is not required to come up with it for themselves or on the fly. And that has some real value because if you're an Arizona State University student participating in a face-to-face class, a combination of online and face-to-face or a hybrid, or a online or e-learning or digital only experience, there's less shock moving between those zones, right? Because there's similarities and structures that have been built for those to be similar in many ways. And I think that it's important to know that context as well, right? That this conversation might be very different if we were talking about Sam and Amy as the two only online instructors in the Teachers College, right? But we're sort of resting on a number of policies, services, technologies that help us deliver this online experience in a certain way. That having been said, though, there's a really great question about when you're talking about online learning, e-learning, online assessment, and questions around motivation, engagement, etc. And I'm wondering, Sam, just thinking about the sheer size, of classes that are running in the Applied Behavioral Analysis program. What are your thoughts on those aspects of student motivation for engagement, for learning, et cetera, in these large, in particular in these extremely large courses?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And of course, our students have various degrees, magnitude, levels of motivation, we although we cannot know the motivation of each individual student, we do place emphasis on students identifying their goals, their academic goals, their career goals, their next step goals, and we do that for several reasons. One is to help them to begin to articulate, to be able to talk about what they are seeking from their program. It also informs us as instructors on what is of value, what does motivate our students. And we observe a wide range. I know I use that term a lot in this discussion. We have students who are aiming to then sit for a licensure exam or a credential or a certification after their training and their preparation. And so they are not only striving for and motivated by a letter grade in a course, which is certainly a strong motivator, or having a certain grade average throughout their program, but they are also preparing to be able to demonstrate their skills and expertise and pass an external exam for a credential, for a certification beyond their program. Perhaps we have a subset of our students who are enrolled in the program because they want to use the skills that they gain with their own children. They want to use the skills that they gain in their current employment to move beyond their level of employment and to be more effective at what they are doing. And so we I guess a long answer, but we try to not only gain awareness of their goals, of what is motivating them, but to help them recognize as well how what they are doing in an individual class or course in their program can contribute to their goal.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's so important because one of the things that you're illuminating is that motivation is happening in two directions, right? And it's not a constant, right? Students often come in with very high motivation that then goes through dips and lifts throughout. And in some sense, designing for motivation is part of how we think about our classes, right? We think about, and one of the things I'm taking away is that if assessments in the class are not, in a sense, providing motivation, right, for students to continue to learn, to continue to engage, then it's worth looking at whether those assessments are really doing the function that you want them to do, right? So students should, in a sense, it sounds like assessment should always motivate students or give students the opportunity to feel more motivated because they have the tools to improve, they have feedback on their performance, they have a sense of their trajectory, and that the structures we're giving them allow them to improve, right? To make changes, to do all those things. We have about 3 minutes to go, and I feel like we could go for another 3 hours, and not a moment of that 3 hours would be wasted or boring in any way. And I find it useful sometimes that we end with just a big unanswerable question, that we just sort of can sit with and think about. And really, I think it's a question about does this philosophy of academic integrity that we're talking about today, this idea that is focused on student growth, that isn't about the application of in some sense, Black or white standards without concern for the individual student. Is that the right direction? Is that a good thing, right? Or is it better that we have these more strict, standardized sort of models? And I'm wondering if you just could close with some thoughts on that trajectory as higher ed continues to evolve towards a more diverse, more inclusive environment. So Amy, would you mind?
I think, Stuart, you're closing this webinar with an unanswerable question. And I think that that's something to encourage us to think about as we're designing courses and finishing coursework, right? Like, does the learning actually end at the end of a course? Or how does it continue? And what questions are left unanswered? And which are left unanswered intentionally? Instead of me sharing my opinion on this question, which I would really love to do, I would just like to say that this idea of Black or white rules or learning through growth, what does the policy look like in practice, is something that every educator will have a slightly different take on. And so as students move through an educational environment, what they believe and how they interact with an instructor and an instructor's beliefs might be different at every interaction, right? So even though I could take on an opinion or a value and I could design my course in that particular way, there's no guarantee that when the student leaves my course and goes to another one, that value is going to be the same. So I think what's important is to have students determine what their value is. What do they believe is important about academic integrity, about authenticity in learning, about producing information, so that when they're in context, they can determine what is the value in this space and how does what I believe interact with the values that are at play. They can then make informed decisions about how to take on information from that course, how to produce information that might be valuable for other people to understand, but to recognize that there is a value in place in all of the contexts that we engage in with learning. And one of the values we can determine is, what is the goal of academic integrity in this space? Is it a hard and fast rule, or is it growth learning mindset opportunity? So I think raising that awareness for students, getting them to engage in their thinking, will help them navigate their future context, both as a learner and possibly eventually as a teacher.
Wonderful. And Sam, any thoughts?
Well, yeah, actually, I like the way that you address that, Amy, and the way that you describe it brings to mind an ongoing conversation that I find myself in with our members of our instructional team who were previously students. They're alumni of our program who go, beyond our program. They graduate, they are practicing in the field, in the profession, and they apply to be a member of the instructional team, a co-instructor. I have I have conversations with those applicants when I interview and we hire our alumni, and we talk directly about their perspective on academic integrity, both from what they remember when they were a student in our program, and their perspective now as an instructor, as a co-instructor, and in the field. And the way that you've described that, Amy's described it, I think is something that we need to continuously examine as we refine courses, as we refine our program, as we design and refine the professional development that we provide our instructional team. and ultimately the messaging ongoing and conversation ongoing with our students.
So thank you very much, and a question for all of us to ponder. We're at 9 o'clock, so on behalf of the Teachers College at Arizona State University and the U.S. Embassy in Rabat, I'd like to thank our presenters, Dr. Sam DeGangi and Dr. Amy Marcos, for their time and thoughts today on this incredibly important topic on assessment, leaving us with a lot to think about and a lot to ponder. Our next webinar will be on November 4th, where we'll be talking about assessment through application. So we hope that you can join us there as well. As a reminder, all participants in this webinar will receive a certificate by email at the end of the webinar, and that participating in 4 or more of these webinars will provide you with a digital badge indicating your commitment to learning more about universal design for learning, assessment, and other associated topics. So once again, thank you, everyone. Thank you to the wonderful team of people who make these webinars possible. And we look forward to seeing you at our next session. Have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening, and thank you.